quick introduction. My name is Audrey. I'm a designer. You can tell by the black. And I work at DesignMap. We're a design consultancy up in San Francisco. There's 4 partners, and I'm one of them, so hopefully I have something useful to say. I didn't know that Marty was going to give me a shout-out this morning, and like 5 people have come up to me and said, Marty said your talk was good. So no pressure. Marty and I worked together at Netscape back in the olden days. Does everybody know what Netscape is still? Great. That's good. I know someday it's going to happen. Some young person's going to know Netscape, but so far so good. So as a designer working at a design consultancy, I and the folks that I work with a lot of product managers, and we get stuff from them, which I'm loosely calling requirements as a very large super bucket. And what I want to talk with you guys about today is speaking designer, or another way to think about it is like hitting the sweet spot with what you deliver to designers to save time, make work more pleasant, and get better work out of your design team. So I'm going to talk about problems with requirements. So first I'm going to show you some examples. I'm going to talk about problems too broad and too narrow, and then some techniques to deal with that. And then one of my business partners is here, and 2 designers who are newer to DesignMap. So they're going to join me in everything that you ever wanted to ask or complain about or rant about to a designer. You can do it here because we don't work together. So the thing about requirements, like as designers, we get to see other designers' actual work product like all the time, right? There's Dribbble and tons of websites, and if you go to a design conference, that's what you see. But I don't think that you guys get to see each other's work very much, right? Is that true? So I thought I would show you some stuff that we get from other PMs. What I did is I asked, there's 45 of us, and I asked them, hey, you guys, just take a screenshot of whatever you got requirements-wise from the product manager that you're working with today and send it to me. And I sort of accidentally used the word requirements, thinking, of these 45 people, that pretty much what everybody was going to send me were stories, right? We work with Marty a lot. We work with people who work with Marty a lot, Jeff Patton as well, so we think they're going to be stories. I got some stories, but I also got a ton of other things. Emails and story maps and PowerPoint decks and all kinds of stuff. So I had to take a minute before I just start showing you guys stuff and just broadly put these into context for myself, because I was like, what is all this stuff? So I'm totally not going to get into process, which has been covered and will be covered and is a whole other talk. But very roughly, there's this like world of requirements documents that happens alongside of or before or instead of stories, and it's still happening. Stories happen for sure, but there's this other thing. And so without further ado, I'm going to share some other people's requirements with you. I can know that since we're in LA. So yeah, there's stories in Trello boards and Jira. Just sharing some detail with you, and I've taken out most of the identifying characteristics of these, but here's a story that somebody else wrote last week. There's these big story map things, and there's some detail. There's a bunch of tools out there to do story maps and share them digitally. Email. This email's fun. It's got this requirement in it. This is not made up, like word for word, the requirement that we got, which is fine, right? Go look at them. There's a ton of Word documents, and this surprised me. Even though I'm a practicing designer, I was still surprised to see all these Word documents, and we're sophisticated enough, I guess, that we don't call them product requirements documents anymore, right? Because we don't do PRDs, right? It's the world of stories. But there are still these documents which are not PRDs, which are just simply a list of product requirements titled something else. what they did have in common is they're about 10 pages, so that's good, because I remember getting 100-page PRDs, but they're still existing. Some of them are highly narrative, and I wanted to share this one, and you might want to read like a few sentences. This product manager is actually the COO of the company. So he's doing this. I love this detail. Her friends tell her she should focus on finding a man and settling down. Whatever. Isn't that great? He's super fun to work with, actually. Some of them are way more analytic than that, right? This is like in Excel, sort of. And then, like I said, there's these kind of very traditional-looking PRDs. Again, this is not a PRD, but it's simply a list of product requirements in a document. And then most often what's happening, actually at least half of the time, is that designers or developers are meeting with the product manager to have an understanding, right? So that, I don't know if you've heard that, the Jeff Patton saying, like don't confuse a shared document with shared understanding. That's a great saying. So these things get written, then we are doing a good job of getting together and understanding, and then somebody else, as often as not, a designer or developer or both, are converting that into stories and then putting those stories into Jira or Trello or something else. Some of them have pictures with technical diagrams. Some of them have pictures of the current state. Some of them have rough pictures created. This is a mock-up / wireframe created in PowerPoint. Some of the pictures are more rough than others. So I'm not going to talk about these requirements or where they come from or why. I think good requirements can come from anywhere. But what I want to talk about is a useful factor in considering whether or not the requirements are something that can bring your team's best work to bear on the product. So all of these I can pick a spectrum, and this is the spectrum I have picked, which I think is a useful one. We can map all these requirements onto a spectrum from too broad to too specific. Somewhere in the middle, there's like this sweet spot. I think the sweet spot varies, and I'll say like one sentence about that at the end. But generally, there's this sweet spot where you're efficient and effective. And that's what I'm going to talk about. So on the too specific side, this is an example, I think, of a too specific requirement. They show up with an abundance of detail, and you can kind of recognize them by the words that they come with, or we can, right? So it's usually the word just is when you want to perk up your ears, right? Somebody says, just, and then what follows is like, just jazz it up a bit, or just make it sparkle, just put some lipstick on it, just make it sexy. Those all mean I have completed the design, and what you, the designer, needs to give me now is the pretty parts, right? The other way to recognize a too specific requirement is by the process. So very often what happens, you kind of end up in this process, the product manager or the CEO or someone has a pretty specific idea in their minds. So they draw that idea and they give it to a designer, and then the designer comes back with something like totally different, right? This is a completely different thing from what they had in their head, and they're like bummed out. That's because they had this specific idea, and the designer, or sometimes the developer, depending on what the specific idea is about, is like, doesn't understand that you're done with the design when you gave them that picture. They went away and did what they do, right? Which is want to make a meaningful contribution to your product. And now you're totally way off track. So I've started to call these things, these too specific kinds of requirements, napkins. And this is just like one drawing of one typical design process. It doesn't really matter what the process is, but the idea is that the napkin like skips you doing the good stuff that you do to make a contribution, skips all the way to the end and says, you don't need to contribute, this is the end of the story. And that's crazy frustrating, right? And it wastes time because you start way off track. And the most important thing is that you lose the best of what your team has to offer because they don't really get a chance to contribute. They're just like putting lipstick on it, right? So I want to be careful here to say that I think drawing is a great way to communicate, especially with designers, right? They're visual people. There's a reason that they spend all day with pictures. How many of you guys have given a drawing to a designer? Okay, so I think that's awesome. What's not great is when that drawing is meant to be the end of the conversation, or when that drawing is meant to be the end of the process. If your drawing is the beginning of the conversation, great. If it's the end, then that's a napkin, what I've started to call a napkin, right? Which is the outline of a solution that kills people's chance to make a meaningful contribution. And I could talk about napkins all day. I'm not going to. But what I like about napkins is that they don't apply just to designers. Like, all kinds of people get napkins. And as I've started to think and talk to people about this idea, you almost can't meet a person who doesn't get a napkin in their life. So as product managers, you get napkins, right? Because the CEO comes and says, hey, I was in the shower and I've got it, right? And now that's your napkin, right? That's the product that you have to make. As a boyfriend or girlfriend, you might hear, so our anniversary is coming up, and I was at the store the other day, and I saw this great pair of earrings, right? That's a napkin. You don't get to contribute. I'm a parent. Letters to Santa, napkin. I know what to get you. I don't need you to tell me what to get, right? So how many people have gotten napkins? Yeah. Usually, too, when I talk about this, somebody turns to the person next to them and starts to do this. How many people have given napkins? Yeah, me too. So on the other side of too specific, I'm going to come back to too specific and talk about some techniques if you feel like you're giving somebody something too specific to kind of back yourself out. But on the other side, there's this too broad thing. So just to define that quickly, there's the word just again, usually. But instead of being really specific and talking about appearance, it's very broad, and it's talking about experience. And so it's like, just have fun with it, Or just make it sticky, which still this word exists and it happens all the time. And so someone will say, like, it's a product, and, just have fun. You know what to do, just, like, make it sticky, right? Whatever that means. Or do your thing, your thing. So another way to recognize it, in addition to the just statement, is by the process that you end up stuck in. So this word happens. It's a word and not a picture because it's too broad and not too specific. So you know what to show. Just make it simple and modern. And it sounds obvious, but so the designer decides to make a go of it, and they're like, okay, is it this? Not quite. Okay, that? Nope. All right, what about this? Nope. Okay, that, this, that, nope, nope, nope. And this is true story. I took the name of the company out. It's not that iteration is bad, right? Just like drawing isn't bad, obviously iteration is good. The problem comes in when you're iterating like 20 times before it's even close enough to something that you had remotely imagined that you're ready to show it to somebody to get their feedback on it, right? So for you guys as product managers, and I talk to designers about this as well, so they share part in this little process. If you're like having them go back and go back and go back and go back, it might be that they're just not a great designer, not impossible. It might also be that they need a little bit more boundary there to get closer to the mark to start with before you guys start iterating on something real that you would want to show to a client. Again, time-consuming, frustrating. So we have this spectrum mapped out, and I just want to quickly move through some specific techniques that can help move requirements more towards the middle. So 2 techniques on the too specific side. This first one I call drawing out loud. So let's say that you have this idea in your head, you really have it, and you draw it. And the reason you draw that, to be honest with you, is because it's hard to kind of step back from that and talk about the motivations and the ideas, right? The picture came into your idea as a picture. So go ahead and use it, draw the picture. But instead of handing that picture as is to the designer and saying anything with the word just in it, draw it again with them in the room. So you have it on a napkin or on a whiteboard or whatever. Don't change medium because that changes more than just the medium. Take the same exact medium, the napkin or the whiteboard, and draw it again and just think out loud while you draw it, like you would ask a usability participant to think out loud while they're using your product. And as you do that, you might be surprised at what comes out of your mouth, and you're going to feel uncomfortable with silence, which is why we ask people to, a tool that we use to get people to think out loud in usability research. And so you'll fill the silence with, you know, this was really important because of that. I learned this last time, and so I put it here. I didn't know what to put here, so I just filled this in. And that's going to be really helpful because what you're doing then, right, is cheating a little bit, and you're backing out from the end of the process, a little bit of a step back to explain the motivation that got you there, even if you didn't know it when you made the drawing. Does that make sense? Okay. The second one is also very simple, and I hope, you know, on Monday, if you handed somebody a drawing that you could walk in and use one of these and make some progress, is three things. So take your drawing, again, and just say, these are the three most important things that this does. In this case, I said, maybe it's, so this is a napkin sketch of a card detail page for if you were on a website that helps you understand which car you wanted to buy. So maybe the pictures are really important. Big images are really important. The thing on the upper right is driving people to a dealer to get a quote, which is revenue generating, right? And then down here is card details. And so if you say, hey, these are the three most important things that these do, can you do an iteration for me that emphasizes each one of these things? So let's do an iteration that emphasizes large visuals. Let's do an iteration that really focuses on driving people to the dealer. And then let's do an iteration that really focuses on getting the details across. Again, you've cheated yourself a little bit by taking a step back from the end game into some ideation. There's other three things questions that you might ask yourself and share with the designer. So in addition to three most important things that this does, three things that you want to be better, or three things that cannot change. Because I get it. There may be some things that you can't change, and there's a reason it's in the drawings because it has to be like that. Like there's got to be an ad above the fold that's da-da-da-da-da, right? So that's really helpful as well. Okay, so that's two techniques on the too narrow side. And then I'm going to do two techniques on the too broad side. So I call this one Who, What, Mad Libs, right? So if we start with the sentence, the too broad requirement, you know what to do, just make it simple and modern. We can add one more sentence to that, right? So if this is a minimum viable product version of Mad Libs, this product is simple and modern. To be successful, one thing it must do is to help who do what. I know you guys know how to do this, right? This clearly isn't rocket science, but you'll recognize it as sort of the poor man, quick and dirty version of personas and scenarios. But putting it in this form is an easy second sentence for you to give a designer to help draw boundaries for them so that their first effort is a little bit closer to the mark for you. Okay? So the last one is I called Show Me the Money. So if that first technique was about who and what, then this one is about why. So in this, remembering way back to this diagram, I put at the very beginning here the business case, right? So most often, executives and product managers, hopefully, are in a room talking about the business case. And you guys understand this deeply, right? This is the thing that you guys get better than anybody else, right? I hope. There's literally nobody nodding, which I find alarming. Come on, please, can you guys be the ones who know about this? Thank you. So you guys know about this better than anybody else. And very often designers are not involved in that conversation. Designers aren't trained to be involved in that conversation. They might think they don't care about that conversation because they're creatives. Schools now more and more are teaching designers that they need to understand the business case and how the work that they're doing relates to that. CCA in San Francisco has an MBA program now. But most often the designers that you're working with didn't get trained to have this conversation or necessarily to care about this conversation. So it's, I'm asking you, reach out to your design team or your designer and say, even though you think you don't care, and I completely understand and respect that you're a creative person, please come in the room and talk with me about money so that you can understand why we're doing this. How many of you have that conversation with your designers or your design team today? Okay, so I think that's like a quarter of you. Please do that. And then I'll tell the designers the same thing, that they should come and ask you and understand that. Because we don't do design just because it feels good or because we should, right? We do it because it has an impact on the business. And if it doesn't, then maybe we need to rethink what we're doing. So that, again, that understanding why helps give us the second sentence. You know what you need to do, just make it simple and modern. We want to take a crack at the $370 billion female car buyer market, which is true, by the way. And you can see how much further these second sentences will get your designer in understanding what it is that they're trying to do from a very broad first statement. And also that second sentence is an easy one for you guys to do, I think, most of the time. Okay, so there's one last technique, which is good for either case. It's a little bit more complicated, and I know that I'm standing between you and beer with a complicated thing. But I think we can do it. Okay, so this is called the Whitehall Adder. And that's the reason it works for both cases. And you'll understand in a minute. I'm going to start with a complicated slide, and then I'll build it for you, and it'll get easier. So this is out of Stanford. Stanford's a D school. And the idea is that it's a series of statements answering the question why, moving up the ladder, more abstractly and less actionably, and answering the question how, moving down the ladder, more actionably and more concretely. So I'm going to draw one for you, starting from the napkin that I had before. So this is a too detailed requirement. So I'm going to start at the bottom of the ladder because all my hows have been answered. So I'm going to write down these three things, these three aspects of my sketch. I can get a quote, I can compare cars, and I can get car details. And then for each one of these, I can ask the question why to move up the ladder. It's very specifically, baby steps, right? Why do we need to compare? Because we want the user to feel confident in their choices. And then we can go a step further. Well, why do we want them to feel confident? Well, we really want them to be happy with the process. It's important to our brand. Okay, we can move down the ladder with alternate hows. Okay, how else might we help them be happy with the process? Maybe we act even more as a partner in the buying process. Maybe we literally act as a partner in the buying process. How else we might help them feel confident in their choice? Well, maybe there's reviews. Reviews are also a way that buyers might be confident in their choice. So, and there are other answers to the question, how else might we? So doing this, and hopefully doing this together with your designer and your dev team, you can imagine how if you had a too broad requirement, you could start at the top and say, how might we? And if it's too specific, then you start at the bottom and you ask why, and you move up. So it works for both. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm going to wrap things up. And then, like I said, I'm going to pull these guys in, and then you can beat us up if you want, or you can just ask questions. So requirements are going to happen all kinds of places, right? Lots of them are going to be great. Sometimes they're going to be too broad. Sometimes they're going to be too specific. But that's causes frustration. It wastes time. And the really key thing, right, is if you guys think of your job as bringing the best that your team has to offer to the table, then you're losing the chance to do that with these requirements. So you can move things more to the middle using the techniques I discussed today. And this is a place I just want to mention about the just right thing, which I didn't define, and I'm going to subvert the question that you asked me at the end, which is like, well, instead of making it not suck by being too broad and not suck by being too specific, why don't we just make it just right? And the answer is because just right, there's no one just right, right? It depends on where you are in your development as a product manager and your understanding of the business and the market. It depends on where your team is, right? And sometimes folks on your team are really going to want you to draw something for them. Or need you to draw something for them. Other times they're going to be very far along in their career, their process. Also, where you are in the product development process will change this. So if it's very early, then more broad is more appropriate. If it's very late, then more specific is more appropriate. So that's why I didn't try to tell you what just right was. I put this in here because I'm going to share the deck, and that way you guys will have this list. So now you know what to do when you get a napkin or when you draw a napkin. And I included too the giants' shoulders on which I stood and future giants. I'm collecting napkins, so if when you get a beer in your hands, you want to come tell me about a napkin, I would love to hear it. And I have lots of examples from estheticians and event planners and teachers and product managers and developers. So I think that's all I have, but I'm going to invite and introduce my business partner, Nathan. He's another one of the four. Oh, thanks. And then I have Micah and Sarah, who are two designers who are more recently with us.
We totally did not mean to wear black, but it is the only color I have in my wardrobe, so.
So, do you guys have questions? Yeah.
How would you advise product people who are working with designers that are a little bit more headstrong and
The designer gives the product manager napkins? Yeah. Yeah, so I would share this deck with them, to be honest. Like, I shared like a version, a more napkin-focused version actually with designers and talked to them about, do you want to use a second?
Here, use that one.
Thanks.
Hello?
And talk to them about like, so just introducing the term napkin, right? And saying, look, you gave me this thing. I realize that it's hard to give me whatever happened before this thing because it's abstract. And there's something valuable here that I want to take advantage of. At the same time, it's important to me that I have an opportunity to make a contribution as well. So how can we work together to bring the best that you have to offer to the table and the best that I have to offer to the table? I worked with a product manager who never gave napkins. She's actually in San Diego. She's amazing. But she contorts herself. She bends over backwards and works really hard to say, it's like, well, they may click, or maybe there's some other way of indicating selection of a thing that could be a button, but maybe it's not a button. She really values design, and she really wants designers' contribution, and she kills herself to do that. And I don't think that's necessary as long as we're just really clear about what's being delivered, whether it's the beginning or the end of a conversation. And so just making that distinction can be really helpful, I think. Headstrong designer?
Yeah.
I'm shocked.
Can I just talk to that for a second? So I think what's really interesting is today has been a lot about kind of technique and skills and hard skills as well as like soft skills. So what I like about Audrey's approach in a lot of things that we do is we're really working, like people are working with other people. And we really have to kind of keep that in mind. And so the example that you had of the too broad, where it was the designer making a design and then the client saying no, 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 like 20 times. The funny thing about that is actually we worked with that product manager specifically probably 6 years. over 3 different companies. And so it's a continuous process. It doesn't mean that, oh, if I've worked with Audrey for, 15 years now, like we get each other so much that we don't have to talk. That's not true. That's actually patently not true. Every week we have a partner meeting and one of us is like, what did you just say? And so it's this constant process around soft skills and team dynamics, understanding where the other person is coming from and how to make them valuable and how to help them. And I think with that headstrong designer, I think you can level up and say, look, is this a coaching moment for me? Is this a moderation moment for me? Is this a facilitation moment for me? Or is this a director moment for me? And I'm just gonna tell this person what to do because we need it done in the next 24 hours. So I think just describing the context and taking different perspectives, super crazy important.
I'm gonna unplug for a minute. I have like one slide that I took out of here, but it was sort of my favorite slide that kind of speaks to that as well. Yeah. The Steve Jobs thingy. More questions?
Yeah, questions together. Since you guys are talking about product and design, how you guys work better with napkins, either one of you talk about engineering as well.
Engineers totally get napkins, right? And when I talk to engineers, they're like, oh yeah, the CTO hasn't written a line of code in 10 years, but he knows exactly how long it's gonna take and how I should architect the damn thing, and I could kill him, yeah. So, and it works the other way, right? Designers give engineers napkins, and it goes the other way as well. So I do think that the napkin concept definitely applies to engineers. I also think that as often as not, people think they're getting a napkin and they're not. Do you know what I mean? Like, they think they're being dictated to, but if they just push on it a little bit, then they find that they're not. So, but for sure it happens. And the other aspect of engineering that's important to bring into this talk is that you want to bring the engineers' best, the best that the engineers have to offer to the table as well. And so that's not only product managers not being too specific or too broad, but it's also designers not being too specific and too broad. And sitting and sketching with the engineer and starting with sketches and not waiting to have a conversation with the engineer until you're in mock-ups, which is just ridiculous. Marty says, right, that the magic happens when you get engineers in a room watching users, and we should take advantage of that opportunity. So, but do you have more to say about that? It sounds like you have more to say. Yeah. Totes. I mean, are you an engineer? Mm-hmm. And you give engineers napkins, is what you're saying? It's the just right one. Perfect.
I think it also comes down to no one wants to be a code monkey. No one wants to put lipstick on a pig. Like, we all want a piece of the inspiration pie where we feel like we're making a valid contribution, which is what Audrey's talking about here. So I talk to my friends, and everyone has that same kind of angst in their job where, well, I'm just doing someone else's vision. We all want to have a say in the vision and to have buy-in, and that goes into telling people about the business requirements. There's no reason that we shouldn't all know what the values are.
And then I think a part of that is also, like, this is why we learn a little bit about what other people do for their jobs so that we can speak to them in this common language. So that's why designers sometimes learn a little bit of code, and then why we sit with the engineers while they're building something. So, like, having this broader education about what other people do will prevent that kind of thing.
It certainly can be interaction as well as visual. Is there something you're thinking it's not? I mean, you can get a napkin about anything. Mm-hmm. Yeah, or an anniversary, or yeah.
How do you convince someone that what you're giving them is not a napkin? Like, I often have to produce wireframes to convey to an engineering team like what something is going to be, because we're prototyping it before it kind of gets designed, because we know the functionality but not necessarily the implementation. So we want to get the engineering team kind of started on the implementation, but then we also go to the design team and work with them and say, hey, this is what we gave the engineers. I guess I'm answering my own question. We don't give them the same thing. Because we give someone a wireframe and we say, look, this isn't the UI, it's not the interface, it's not the interaction. But
Yep.
they're treating it as though it is a napkin. And we're like, no, you don't. Like, we want to see what you come back with. And they come back with 5 flavors of that napkin, like 5 color treatments or whatever, UI treatments.
Yeah.
What's the best way of someone?
So it's like when you give someone that's something that's not a napkin and then they take it that way. And you're like, no, wait, you balsamic, right? Just don't, but don't say just have fun with it. Yeah. So what I would do in that case is I would make 3 versions of it. And I would say it could be this, or it could be that, or it could be this. This is going to force you to think through your idea a little bit more and then say the important thing that all 3 of these have in common is X, Y, and Z. You could actually just give them the X, Y, and Z, right? And actually not give them the drawings, right? Or you could give them the drawings too, but just make sure that you have that list. Because I don't know what your team is like, but I'm going to guess that if they got 3, then they'd be like, well, what the fuck do you want me to do? Like, now I've got 3, am I supposed to do, right? So if you say, I don't know which of these it is, it's probably none of them, but I do know these things that it has in common. Yeah. It's all like just cheating a little bit of cheating. I totally took this slide out because this talk was like 3 hours long when I started. But this is a great diagram by Hugh Dubberly, who wrote an article about how Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive worked together, and abstracted from that this idea of these kind of 4 different ways of working together. And I couldn't fit it in, but I thought it was worth sharing with your question and also the question earlier, right? So sometimes people want you to have a controlling relationship with them. That's what it sounds like they want, right? Right, and you're saying like, I want to be like over here somewhere collaborating. And so it's far, literally and figuratively, but this, having this kind of in your head so that you can be clear on, okay, my goal is to move at least from controlling to mentoring. To start is I found really useful. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question today with what you guys touched on, which is like, what are some ways that you can facilitate a culture where it's okay to question that? Because I feel like designers and engineers are typically very introverted.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you were to write like a set, like a technical tree or some sort of like business goal, they're not going to challenge you necessarily. So how do you facilitate a culture where it's okay to question?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I do think that if you write a document, they have an excuse not to interact with you, right? And for some of these people, there's a reason that they chose to spend all day, every day with a computer. They're not gonna, so even if you write the document, but you don't give it to them, and you say, we're gonna sit down and talk about it together, they don't have a choice, right? They gotta show up if they're gonna get the requirements to start. So, my advice would be to not help them not talk to you by not giving them documents. But then together, right, you can do that story, like everybody's writing stories now, right? Right, so then together you can write stories, and maybe they never actually even get the requirements document because you guys just wrote stories together. You might need to write it down for yourself and for approval with executives and other stakeholders, but they don't ever even get it.
I think another answer to that is having like a common language at your company and making sure that everybody knows that like these are the terms that we use when we want to say in so many words that like I don't like this or I think this should be a different way. It's like, I don't know, it's like how they teach you to talk to like your significant others, like I feel this way when you like that kind of thing. But yeah, I think just making sure that's common throughout your company is important.
The introverted thing is really interesting. At our company, we have 45 designers. And there's a Google spreadsheet of about 40 different like personality tests and astrology and the whole 9 yards. And we really like nerd out about that actually. And it turns out roughly 80% of our company is introverted versus extroverted. In fact, I think one of the extroverts is standing to the right of me. And so with introverts, you can be extroverted if you know that there's an exchange in value. So it kind of comes back to this stuff. If you can approach them in, I need your input, I need your feedback, I need your interaction, and then use the right medium. So the medium is the message. We've got amazing tools nowadays like Trello, even just Google Docs, doing that in real time, showing how mutable and how collaborative it can be, a whiteboard, right? Pretty much the same idea. Just do it in real time, and then you'll get them to interact. And then they'll realize, oh, this is valuable. I feel valued. And then you won't be able to shut the introvert up. So, yeah. What's that?
The personality.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe the list of tests, maybe not all of our results.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys want to know that much about us. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a whole list of them. Yeah, we can share that. We'll tweet it out.
Well, and I think also to that point is as much as we say we want to let companies fail, we have to let people fail sometimes and experiment, and it's about tools. So that means for, like, I know someone as a PM who said, okay, engineers, you're going to be small PMs on this project. Figure out this feature. I don't know. Here's some of the values that I want you to deliver on, and go at it. And then they came back with some great ideas. Or it's as simple as like putting a marker in someone's hand and taking them to a whiteboard. It's terrifying, but once they get drawing, you never know what they're going to come up with. Other people?
How often do you see the situation where the requirements are highly specific because there isn't a lot of trust in the designer, so they kind of have to be told what to do?
For us, that's less common because they're paying us, right?
Well, but they're paying you because they don't trust their own internal designers.
Yeah, so you're touching on a point that actually Audrey and I talked about kind of in the run-up to this week, and I think experience and skill matters. So just making that, like, what is just right for our team, very important. So if you have junior designers, I think you need to be prescriptive, but always circle around and say, this is why, right? So the why, how stuff, the leveling up, am I being which mode am I being in? And just being conscious with that with them is really important. But at the end of the day, you're probably going to be prescriptive. You're probably going to be highly specific for good effect. It just means that, as long as that dynamic is obvious and for why, I think that's fine. So, even at our company, staff development is a really big part of our job. And we have crazy variables in experience and skill levels, and even across different design disciplines. And so we deal with that on a day-to-day basis as well. And I think that's why the just right thing is, there is no just right. You kind of have to see what the factors are and then figure that out together. So it's kind of a non-answer, unfortunately, I just realized, but.
In all this napkin thing, like, there's something really core. I don't think, this is just me, I don't think you can underestimate the strength of people's desire to make a meaningful contribution. So recognizing that, and it's true for PMs and designers and engineers and CEOs and everybody, and so recognizing that, understanding what they think they have to offer, and then explicitly understanding that, and then finding opportunities for that to happen, gets rid of, like, kind of all this stuff, right? And so it might be the PM might not trust the designer. The PM also might want to be making the meaningful contribution. But ignoring the fact that the designer also wants to contribute meaningfully is a recipe for disaster, I think. Because they're expensive pencils, right? Designers, even ones right out of college. There's a reason you hired them. Mm-hmm. So sitting with someone and watching them do their job and having them come with you.
But you're working with them.
Mhm.
Robotics are doing like hardware, software programming.
Mhm.
Kind of talking about this area, even with you're not working with coding.
Mhm.
That comes from the non-stop methodology, but it's something that you're applying to everywhere.
So applying the pair programming philosophy to any discipline, not just programming. Mhm. All right. I got the high sign that we're almost out of time, which means the beer looms. Is there anything else or any complaints that you want to make about the designers that you're working with?
Oh, yeah.
I like hearing about that stuff. Yeah, he's like, yes, I have a complaint.
You guys use, sorry to plan the question, you guys use a certain methodology. Like I've noticed with my group, creative, it's hard to fit them into Agile sometimes. It's like it's more like a throw of the fence type thing. But I'm just curious if you have any recommendations.
We don't have a certain methodology. I mean, all our clients are agile. They're all, like to joke, they're all agile, but like, yeah, we're agile, but we just started. Or yeah, we're agile, but only to the dev team and not the design team. Or yeah, we're agile, but for us, part of the interesting design problem is not just designing the product that we're working on, but designing how we work together. But I think if your designers are there because they want to get a successful product released into the market, then they can't throw it over the wall. It just doesn't work. That doesn't work. And so if your designers have OKRs or even organizational goals that are warm and fuzzy, but that they're aligned to getting a successful product out into the market, then you just can't be wall people. You can't be throw it over the wall people. It'll never work. And we knew that even when we were Waterfall, right? Nobody did Waterfall like that, or else it wouldn't work. And so if they're truly designers, they're not doing it just because it feels good, because if they were, they'd be artists, I think. They're doing it because they're interested in the bounded problem solving and the impact that they're going to have in the world. So that's the North Star. Then the process aligns to support that. And I don't know, I mean, I'm happy to talk with you about your process, but whatever the change you make is, it has to be better. Yeah. Totes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm so excited about that. I just love that thing. Yeah.
She's literally obsessed.
I'm literally obsessed. I have a time timer on my desk. I have a, yeah. Examples of. We just did our first one, actually, with our first. Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. He was talking about the Google Sprint. I have 2 minutes to talk about the Google Ventures book, Sprint. So that's a really great book. I guess I'll plug on Marty's behalf. The last time I saw him talk, he said, don't buy my book. Amazon gets all the money. Save your money and go buy the Google Ventures book, Sprint, which is a really great book. We have used it. We just used it with our first client. The methodologies in there are things that we've used over and over again. It's sort of just like a new recipe with techniques that we know. It absolutely worked great. It was much more effective because of the focus. And talking with a friend of mine at Google Ventures, he verified, this guy was in 50 of them, and saw them work over and over and over and over again. And one thing he said that was really interesting that I don't think is in the book is that they refuse to do a sprint with a company that doesn't have a designer on staff. Full stop. Just absolutely not, because the work goes nowhere. It's not like the product managers on staff aren't a requirement too, but there are product managers on staff, right? You guys are not the last hire. Even if it's the CEO acting as a product manager, it's like having designer on staff. It's critical to supporting that work going forward. I could talk about that all day. I'm happy to. If anybody wants to do a Google Sprint, call me. Okay, I think we're done. Thank you guys for having us, and thank you guys for your time.